Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. For those of you who've been following our program for more than a decade, you realize we try to come up with innovative approaches and solutions to things that are out there that conventional wisdom and usually the mainstream way of doing things just doesn't seem to achieve the results that people are looking for. Today we're going to be talking about autism as well as the autistic spectrum. Many parents out there loathe to hear the possibility that their child may have autism and what they can do about that. And it's definitely not an easy road. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is author of the book Autism Breakthrough. We're going to be talking about a groundbreaking method that has helped families all over the world help their children to become normalized, if you will. I'm kind of curious about how this all works. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Ron Kaufman. Ron, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Hey there, Daniel. Thanks for having me.
You know, this is really some tough stuff. I know I've had firsthand account myself with a child on the autistic spectrum, although it seemed like most of, I guess, the symptoms, if you will, of autism, and we'll get into sort of detail of what that is, you know, is not an easy place to negotiate because you feel like you're kind of doing a lot of things wrong, and there are a lot of experts out there that don't seem to know any more than you do as a parent, and you wonder, you know, how people haven't just not jumped off bridges, I guess. You know, it's really, you know, a rough thing that's going on here. Kind of embellish on that if you could.
Sure. Well, actually, you said it. It's amazing people haven't jumped off bridges. Unfortunately, some people have, and this is really a testament to the kinds of really devastating, incredibly pessimistic messages that parents are given about their children. Mm-hmm. And, you know, when a parent gets a diagnosis, their child's on the autism spectrum, they're told a few things right off the bat. You know, your child is deeply impaired. This is a permanent, lifelong condition. Your child's never going to recover. There's going to be lots of different situations in your life in which your child's going to suffer, and there's not a huge amount that you can do about it. So I can completely understand why a parent would feel devastated getting all of those messages. You know, people often say the diagnosis of autism is devastating, but really it's the prognosis that's devastating.
Mm-hmm. I know because, you know, they kind of link this to be more of an approach from a mental standpoint, and this is more of a physical condition, isn't it?
Well, it's a neurological condition with for some kids some physical, immunological, and digestive components as well.
Okay. Now, tell us how this all started for you and how you moved in this direction with your life.
Sure. I mean, it started pretty early for me. You know, when I was a young boy, I was diagnosed with severe autism. And when I say severe, I mean I had no language, no communication whatsoever, no eye contact. I was very much encapsulated in my own world. My parents were told I had an IQ below 30. And I would spend my days rocking back and forth, flapping my hands in front of my face, also taking kitchen plates and spinning them on their edge on the floor over and over again. And my parents were told, hey, we're really sorry. This is a really severe case, and you have to understand that this is a permanent, lifelong condition. Your son's never going to learn to speak. He's never going to prefer people over objects, and he's certainly never going to, you know, grow up to live on his own, fall in love, have a job, graduate college, you know, many of the things that many parents take for granted when they have kids. And my parents did something really amazing in the face of that, which was that they really turned their backs on all these dark predictions, and they developed their own home-based, very much child-centered program where they worked with me for a little over 3 years. And they called their program the Sunrise Program, but they spelled it S-O-N because I was their son.
Mm-hmm. Now, tell us about this program and how they uniquely approached this to create the kind of changes that you experienced.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. They, in order to help me, they actually had to do the exact opposite of everything they were told to do. I mean, literally, they were told, you know, the way autism was treated then and is still the dominant paradigm today is as a behavioral issue where the idea is we want to stamp out the unwanted behaviors and promote the wanted behaviors. But my parents really realized that my behaviors were just symptoms and that really autism was a social relational challenge. So what they realized is rather than trying to force me to conform to a world that I didn't yet understand, they realized they had to join me in my world first and create a relationship with me on my terms first. And what that looked like in practice was, so remember I told you I would spin little plates on their edges over and over again. My mom was told to take the plate away, stop me from doing that. But what she did is every time she saw me doing that, she'd get a plate, she'd sit down next to me, and she would spin plates with me. And although she was told this was the very worst thing she could do, that this would create more of that behavior, in practice what happened was that was the first time I started looking at her, smiling at her, including her in my play. And the more she did that, the less I did those behaviors. And we've now seen this, we've done this with kids in over 100 different countries, and we've seen that the more we join these kids, the more connected they become and the less into those behaviors they become.
Now, what's fascinating about autism is many people became aware of it, of course, from the movie Rain Man, and this goes back to, 1988. And are we talking about people that could have autism to that degree, or, because the spectrum is pretty wide and ranging as far as autism goes?
It's a very wide spectrum, and the one upside to autism becoming prevalent is that at least nowadays people don't associate it with Rain Man the way they used to, because Rain Man was very far from what 99.9% of families and children experience. It's actually almost irrelevant to the autism discussion, really, because that was a sort of Hollywoodized version. Basically, most kids on the autism spectrum have a lot of trouble even speaking and forming sentences. And then there is a type of autism called Asperger's syndrome, and we work with many kids and adults with that. That is at least slightly similar to Rain Man in that these kids tend to have high IQs and can talk, just as well as you and I, but they tend to have trouble with the simplest of social connections and the social interactions, which is why the Sunrise program is really good for kids with Asperger's syndrome or severe autism, because either way, we focus like a laser beam on socialization and helping kids become more interactive and more connected to other people. I mean, look, my parents worked with me for 3.5 years. And at the end of that period, I recovered completely and ultimately, graduated from Brown University with a degree in biomedical ethics. But that's actually not what's most exciting to me about it. What's most exciting is that socially, my whole life, that's been one of the easiest things for me in terms of making friends and connecting with people, and I attribute that entirely to my parents' work with me.
Now, you say one of the keys that they started with was getting eye contact. Tell us why that's important, because it's really interesting when you meet with people that have children with autism. They'll either tend to look at you or they won't. And I've seen even people under so-called normal conditions doing the very same thing. So, there's not much of a difference there. But I used to go to this thing called game night that happened once a month, and that would be where parents gathered together and they had children who were on the spectrum, and they came together and played video games or whatever it was they were interested in. And it was interesting to talk with the parents and realize, how far they had come just to even get their child to get to something like this, to the point where they looked forward to it. But at the same time, you almost felt like there was this passive resignment, like this is as good as it's ever going to get. And I thought, in a way it was heartbreaking to hear the stories of how they were trying to approach, I guess, curing it, if you will, for lack of a better word. And from what we were experiencing, it just seemed like this is just an incredibly hard road, and it doesn't seem like anybody's offering anything out there that's going to move in the direction where it seems like things might normalize.
Well, look, it's an interesting point you bring up, Daniel, because when you talked about that resigned feeling, parents are told over and over again what their children on the spectrum are not going to be able to do. And this is true whether their child is 3 years old or 13 or 33. And they're told this over and over again. And so when people do try and help children on the autism spectrum, especially if the child's a little more advanced, is the focus ends up diving into the academics and sort of task-based things, learning math or learning reading or learning how to do some sort of self-help skill. And not that those things are useless or anything. There's some use to that, but that kind of misses the point of what's really going on for our kids, which is this difficulty relating to people socially, which I know that sounds like a technical term, but when you think about it, the parents I talk to, they don't stay up at night praying that one day their child will be caught up in math. They stay up late at night praying that one day their child will say, I love you, and really mean it, or laugh at a joke because they really think it's funny, or have a best friend or a girlfriend. And that's the kind of thing that gives a lot of our lives its richness, and that is absolutely open to our children on the spectrum. Totally. It's just that it's not open to them if we already write our kids off as just not capable of that. We have to find a way to help them be capable. And one of the things I say to parents all the time is that with children on the autism spectrum, our job is not to make them more intelligent. They're already brilliant. Our job is to unlock the intelligence that they already have.
Mm-hmm. So this is something that obviously, because of how you turned out, that you can actually encourage and get your child to be able to do, is to open up and be more social than they typically are.
Yes, I mean, and I'm so grateful, and I understand that, I had a really unique set of parents, and I love my parents. They still teach at the Autism Treatment Center of America, which is our nonprofit organization that teaches the Sunrise program in Massachusetts. But so I feel very grateful, and I feel very lucky. But I also feel like our kids in general are capable of so much more than what families are originally told. They're capable of so much more. And so that's why when we work with kids, we have, sometimes we'll work with a 2-year-old, sometimes we'll work with a 22-year-old, sometimes we'll work with a child from America, sometimes we'll work with a child from Japan. And what we see is there's a commonality in that our children are capable of incredible growth and change. And that doesn't mean that every child's going to turn out like me, even if they do the Sunrise program. Obviously, every child is different. Mm-hmm. We've had children after me who've completely recovered, like me, but we also have children after me who've not fully recovered but have made extraordinary change and growth. So I wouldn't want to say that, the only, quote, successful outcome is if a child looks and acts like me. But what I do think is it's so wonderful if a parent can learn to really connect with their child and then help their child connect more with the world, and that's what we help them to do.
Now, I know you start off by talking about, again, I was kind of got rattled on to a longer question, but it was about eye contact. What goes on there that seems to be one of the most important first steps? Yeah,
well, what eye contact ultimately is it's a form of connecting to another human being. It's not that we want kids to have – I've seen some other therapies that focus on eye contact more because it makes the child look more, in quotes, normal. That has nothing to do with what we're trying to do. We're not trying to make the child look neurotypical. We're actually trying to help the child connect with people because they want to. And so when we focus on eye contact, and we don't focus on it like we give them a reward or an M&M or a toy if they do it, we try and make it exciting to them. We build games where eye contact is one of the more exciting pieces of the games. And what we find is that when these children, who at first do have difficulty with eye contact, when they become more comfortable looking at people and looking right in their face and right in their eyes, they become more comfortable with people in general, and they become more comfortable with interacting with people overall. And so we're building a bigger and bigger and more sturdy bridge from their unique world to our neurotypical world, and eye contact is a key part of building that bridge.
Mm-hmm. Now, you also have other fundamental areas that you outline in the book. What are some other ones that you can share with our listeners?
Sure. I mean, one of the reasons I wrote Autism Breakthrough was because we have parents from all over come to the Autism Treatment Center of America, but I wanted parents and even teachers to have a manual, like where they are, whatever state they're living in, to be able to use the principles on a day-to-day basis and use the techniques. So just some examples. One is I talk about exactly how to join your child in what they're doing, the way my mother joined me when I used to spin plates, how to join your child in their repetitive behaviors so that it'll really build a connection with your child. We talk about also how to take something that your child's motivated by, like could be anything like Disney characters or Star Wars themes or wrestling even. Take something that they're excited by and motivated by and build that into a more interactive game that helps them become more social. I outline a whole Sunrise Program social developmental model, which helps track your child according to different metrics of development. And then I even address things like, how do you handle when your child is tantruming and crying, and how do you help them communicate better? Because what I find, and I was amazed even as I was writing the book, because I was thinking, wow, every chapter I'm writing here, I'm basically telling the reader to do the exact opposite of what they're told to do.
Mm-hmm. It must be fascinating as parents actually have their children go through this program to realize that there's a lot of simplicity in what you're showing here versus the way it's usually approached.
Yes. I've had so many parents, especially lately, come up to me after reading the book and say, "Oh my gosh, it's so logical, it's so simple, it makes so much sense." And this is, in a way, this is a little scary to hear this, because what they're also saying, everything I've been told before so didn't make sense, but I felt like I had to do it anyway. Mm-hmm. And that's what happens a lot. I mean, when I talk to these parents before they've started a Sunrise program, it's really hard for them because they love their child. They're willing to do anything to help their child. And when they're told by a specialist, listen, in order to help this child, you have to take away all the things he loves to do and play with and stamp those things out, the parents hate doing it, but they feel like they have to do it, so they do it.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know one of the big things, too, is lack of flexibility. They like to be very rigid in how they do things, and you could just set one thing off, a very small thing, in a different direction, and it seems to rock their world. But this is also one of those other things that you say developmentally, this is something that can be overcome to certain degrees depending.
It really can. It really can be overcome. Most schools and different therapeutic environments, they either try to break the child of their behavior or their rigidity, which is extremely unhelpful, or more recently what I've seen is they say, listen, children with autism need structure. They have difficulty with flexibility, so we're going to get them to be really good at mastering the structure. So they have a schedule for the day which never changes, which they teach the children to master, and they have different pictures that are called picture exchange communication system cards that match lunchtime and match playtime and match math time and match all the different things, and they get the children really good at obeying the schedule. But the problem is this actually just helps the children be better at being autistic. It doesn't actually help them to be more flexible and less rigid because, look, even if they master the schedule, what happens when something in the schedule has to change, or dinner's at a different time, or you take a different route to the doctor than you usually take? We want to help these kids to be able to be comfortable in these situations and ultimately successful and at ease in these situations. And so we help children with flexibility, and we don't just spend all our time trying to teach them to master some artificial structure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just, again, it's just amazing that something like this is out there showing simplicity again because, even children being raised under so-called normal situations don't get the kind of things that you're talking about here in your book.
That's very, it's so funny you say that, Daniel, because I have had a few parents come up to me and say, I've been using this with my neurotypical kids. I mean, this is good stuff for just anyone who has a kid. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, so happy to hear that because there is so much that we hear about in parenting that tends to be, it catches on as like a fad, but ultimately it doesn't end up getting our kids where we might ideally want them to be.
Mm-hmm. Now, what about the use of medication?
Yeah, well, here's the thing about that. I certainly never, ever advise a parent to or against to do or not to do medication. I'm not a doctor. I don't try and tell them stop this medication or start that medication. There are definitely parents and physicians that feel like certain kids need to be on medication, and I can't tell those people how to do their jobs. But what I will say is this. I will say that oftentimes what we see is when we use principles from the Sunrise program, and oftentimes even just when the parent finishes reading Autism Breakthrough and starts implementing the principles, what they will often find is that the things they thought they needed medication for, especially if they're using the medication for like behavior control, oftentimes they'll find that they're able to get that same result, meaning let's say a child who isn't tantruming all the time or a child who's able to pay attention, they often find that they're able to get the same result that they thought they needed the medication for the principles that they're reading right out of Autism Breakthrough. So I don't say that in the sense of like, hey, stop your medication if you're reading the book. I just mean oftentimes we think we need medication to do something that our kids are already capable of doing.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things that I thought I would point out, because it was certainly a huge motivator when we were working with a child here, was that you say no electronic toys, televisions, or computers because they actually help kids be more autistic. And I've seen that to be almost absolutely true. They would rather hide in their room and play a video game all day long, every day, than do anything else. And I thought, okay, well, this is interesting. And eventually he would get, bored with the specific game and want a new one. And, of course, that never happened.
Right.
You're going to have to get used to this, because the fact is you get to a point you're going to want to do something else. Then there was the connection to the Internet for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, wasting time. And I thought, okay, well, we're going to have to curb this. So eventually what I had implemented was the idea that you're going to have the Internet, but it's going to be from this time to this time, and it will only happen when you achieve these other goals as part of the responsibility to the household. And at first there was a real fight, but it was like, well, you can fight and not have the Internet, or you can do what you should be doing, which is helping out, and then you can have this, but only for a period of time, because I could realize how easy even just normal children, if you will, get so addicted and caught up into that, and you got to weed these kids away from this stuff.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you bring that up, Daniel, because I got to tell you, for a lot of parents, even just what you just said can sound deeply scary to them, not because you're incorrect, but just because oftentimes those are our best babysitters. Like, for instance, when we have to cook dinner and otherwise our child will be, tearing up the place. Oh, if we plop them in front of the TV or a computer, I know my child's safe. I know my child's occupied. I can cook dinner. And I really, really understand that. I don't begrudge any parent for doing that. However, you raise a very important point, which is these, and as you quoted directly out of Autism Breakthrough, which is these electronic sort of gadgets ultimately help our children to be better at being autistic. Now, that's okay. I don't think autism is a terrible thing, and that means these kids shouldn't, it's terrible if they're doing things that are considered autistic. I'm fine with that. But the thing is if we want our children to eventually be able to be more social and be able to connect with people, these things are helping to move them in the opposite direction. And so one of the things that I talk about in Autism Breakthrough is that basically we help parents. We do this when parents come to the Sunrise Program startup at the Autism Treatment Center of America. We show them how to create a special playroom environment. It could be the child's own bedroom that's designed to reduce overstimulation. A lot of our children have what's called a sensory integration disorder, which is the part of their brain that organizes everything they see and hear and even touch is malfunctioning, and so things come in all jumbled up. And so when you have more sensory stimulation, it actually overloads the child's brain more and makes everything else you're doing harder, and also can be very distressing to some of these children, even if it doesn't look like that. And so one of those things that's overloading to them is electronic things like iPads and stuff like that. And the reason why is, number one, it's an additional sensory overload, but number two, those things are never going to challenge them to be social. Those things are incredibly predictable, which our kids love. And so those kids those things are always going to be a magnet for our kids. And but the problem is it's really hard to have them interact with another person when they're competing with a machine that's essentially perfect. So what we do is we don't say remove electronic things forever, but we're saying for some temporary amount of time so that you can start to build this bridge that I've been talking about where the child can cross it and be more part of our world. We say to strongly limit and possibly eliminate the use of those devices, and then you can get more and more interaction. And then when your child is more interactive, of course then they can use electronic devices.
Which is exactly, from my perspective, I was actually going purely on instinct. And saying, I think this is going to work. And what I did notice about, in the book Autism Breakthrough is that a lot of the things that you implement in order to help children to develop, which is really what it is, it's just getting them to develop, is that it really kind of falls in line with a lot of good coaching and self-help motivation at the same time. I mean, again, this could be a book parents could actually read just even raising their child, normally, so to speak.
I mean, I hope so. In fact, the last chapter of the book, and I save it till last very deliberately because I want people to really see all the techniques first. But the last chapter is all about our own attitude and emotional states when we're with our children with autism. Mm-hmm. And people just don't realize, because it's never talked about, how much our own emotional states, let's say whether we're frustrated with our child or we're stressed out at our husband or our wife or our job or we're scared for our child's future, when we're in an emotional state that's agitated like that, we're coming from the best of intentions. But for our child, especially a child with autism, we just look like an agitated person when we're feeling that way. And so they see that as a threat, and they will actually be either more withdrawn or more aggressive when in the presence of someone like that. But on the other side, when they're with someone who is comfortable and delighted and relaxed and enjoying the child and free from any emotional disturbance, then the child sees this person as safe. And if they see them as safe, they will cross rivers to get to you. And so I spent some time at the end of the book, but also we spend a lot of time at the Autism Treatment Center of America helping parents to overcome these really big and very understandable emotional obstacles, because they can only be the best advocate for their child and the best at reaching their child when they first surmount their own attitudinal challenges, because then their child's going to see them as safe and interact with them. So that piece is crucially important, and nobody ever talks about that when it comes to the subject of autism.
Well, I want to thank you, first of all, for coming on our program to talk about this. Again, we like to kind of consider ourselves renegades out there presenting information that you're not typically hearing about. And, first I'll applaud you on that. Secondly, we actually had a guest on the program. She has produced a book called Sacra Therapy, okay? And she took a look at the 170-plus mental conditions that are out there and tried to put together a different way to approach it from a more holistic approach of healing. And autism was one of those that we talked a little bit about, and it was interesting that she puts in her book about autism is that they came into this world where they generally enjoy their own company. They like going into the bedroom and kind of being by themselves, and that should be okay, that you
Absolutely.
Can eventually develop that in a different direction. But, what she was so right is, and this is somebody who's a psychotherapist licensed, she's a holistic practitioner. She's worked in the education system. I mean, so she's a real deal person that deals in mental health, decided there needs to be a different approach to taking a look at mental health from the way that we have been over the decades and maybe even the centuries. And she says, I may get stoned to death, but I'm going to put it out there. And I said, well, it's because of people like you that put stuff out there like this that allows us the opportunity to realize, the way we've been approaching and dealing with these things really hasn't been effective. And that's what we should be always taking a look at is how effective is it toward moving toward the goals that we want to take a look at.
Yes. And I mean, when you talked about her coming out and saying something controversial, I really have to look back at my parents and the fact that they were willing to do something totally different and help me when no one else was giving me a chance, and that what they then did with me then resulted in them and us being able to help tens of thousands of kids across 100 different countries. So I will always just have such incredible respect and love and admiration for my own parents. And I want to just tell you really, really quick, Daniel.
Sure.
I am actually doing a lecture at the Oregon Convention Center in Portland, Oregon, this coming Saturday at 2 p.m. And it's totally free and open to the public, and people can go to autismtreatment.org, which is our website, but that'll also let you register for it for free. And then I'm also speaking in Boston the next Saturday. So people can go to autismtreatment.org, and they can click on the Boston button or the Portland button, and they can actually register for these lectures for free. And in those lectures, I'll give them specific things they can do that day with their child.
Oh, well, that's fantastic. I want to thank you again for being on the program. Give out that website one more time.
Sure. It's autismtreatment.org.
And the book is Autism Breakthrough, the groundbreaking method that has helped families all over the world. And our guest today, Ron Kaufman. Ron, thank you so much for being with us on the program today. Now I know I won't be throwing my fits the way I used to.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
You bet. Take care. We want to thank you, the listeners out there, also for joining us. You can find out more. We're going to dedicate a page on our website at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50, so you can find out more and have resources to take the first next big step. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. You've been listening to the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.